I never thought a piece of paper could break my heart so completely. 68 years on this earth, and I've weathered plenty of storms. Losing my husband Tom 3 years ago, watching my daughter Sarah struggle through her divorce, helping raise little Jake while she worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment in Queens. But holding that ticket in my trembling hands, reading those words printed in bold black letters, reserved seating, the old lady in the corner, I felt something inside me crumble. The autumn wind whipped through the school parking lot, carrying the scent of fallen maple leaves and the distant aroma of hot dogs from the concession stand. Parents hurried past me in their designer coats and polished shoes, chatting excitedly about their children's performances. I stood there in my worn wool coat, the navy one Tom bought me for our 40th anniversary, clutching that ticket like evidence of my own invisibility. Jake had been so excited about this play for weeks. "Grandma Rose, you have to come. I'm playing the narrator and I get to wear a real bow tie." His 8-year-old face had glowed with pride when he handed me the invitation. Sarah had barely looked up from her laptop when she mumbled, "Mom got you a ticket. It's some community theater thing the school's doing. Some community theater thing." As if my grandson's moment in the spotlight was just another inconvenience in her busy schedule. I smoothed down my silver hair, the same way I'd done every morning for the past 40 years, and walked toward the school's main entrance. The brick building looked imposing against the gray October sky, its windows glowing warmly from within. Other grandparents streamed through the doors, their faces bright with anticipation. I wondered if their tickets had names on them, or if they simply said family or guest. The lobby buzzed with excitement. Children in costume peeked around corners, their faces painted with rouge and theatrical makeup. Teachers herded groups of nervous performers toward the backstage area. I approached the volunteer at the ticket table, a woman about my age with perfectly styled blonde hair and a string of pearls that caught the fluorescent light. "Excuse me," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I think there might be a mistake with my ticket." She glanced at the paper in my hand, then at me, then back at the ticket. Her smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Oh no, honey, that's correct. You're in Section C, Seat 15. Right there in the corner, just like it says. Just like it says." As if those words were perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable. I wanted to ask who had written those words, who had decided that I deserved to be labeled and dismissed. But the woman had already turned to help the next person in line, and I found myself walking toward my designated corner, my cheeks burning with shame I couldn't quite name. The auditorium was filling up quickly. I made my way to Section C, past rows of proud parents with their phones ready to capture every moment. My seat was exactly where the ticket promised, tucked away in the far corner, partially obscured by a support beam. From here, I could barely see the left side of the stage. As I settled into the uncomfortable metal chair, I caught fragments of conversations around me. "Did you see the program? Emma has 3 solos. We got front row seats, thank goodness. The PTA really outdid themselves with the staging this year." Nobody mentioned the old lady in the corner. I closed my eyes and tried to remember why I was here. For Jake, always for Jake, with his gap-toothed grin and his endless questions about everything from why leaves change color to whether Grandpa Tom could see him from heaven. That boy had been my anchor since Tom passed, giving me a reason to get up each morning, to keep going when the loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. The lights began to dim, and a hush fell over the audience. Somewhere behind that red velvet curtain, my grandson was probably adjusting his bow tie and practicing his lines one last time. I leaned forward in my corner seat, straining to see past the support beam, and felt my heart begin to race with an anticipation I hadn't expected. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Jake had seen my ticket when Sarah carelessly left it on the kitchen counter. And what I couldn't have imagined was how that 8-year-old boy would turn my moment of deepest humiliation into something beautiful. The curtain rose to reveal a simple set, a painted backdrop of a small town main street, complete with a general store, a church, and a schoolhouse. The story was about community, about how ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they came together. Jake stepped forward in his little black suit and bow tie, looking so much like his grandfather that my breath caught in my throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," his clear voice rang out across the auditorium, "welcome to Millbrook, a town where everyone has a story worth telling." I pressed myself forward in my corner seat, trying to see around the support beam that blocked half my view. The metal chair creaked beneath me, and I worried that I was making too much noise. A few people in the rows ahead turned to glance back, their expressions ranging from mild annoyance to pity. I sank lower, wishing I could disappear entirely. The play unfolded beautifully. Children sang about friendship and helping neighbors. There was a scene about a lost dog being found, another about a community garden bringing people together. Jake moved between scenes with confidence, his narrator's voice guiding the audience through each vignette. Every time he appeared, my heart swelled with pride, even from my obscured corner. During intermission, I remained in my seat while others filed out to the lobby. I didn't want to face the crowd again, didn't want to see the pity in their eyes or hear their polite but empty pleasantries. Instead, I sat in the dim auditorium, watching the janitor sweep up dropped programs and candy wrappers. "Excuse me, are you Jake Morrison's grandmother?" I looked up to see a young teacher with kind eyes and a warm smile. She was probably in her 30s, with curly brown hair pulled back in a messy bun and paint stains on her cardigan. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I am. I'm Miss Chen, Jake's teacher. He talks about you all the time. My grandma rose this, my grandma rose that. You're quite the hero in his eyes." Hero. The word felt foreign, impossible. Heroes didn't sit in corners with offensive labels on their tickets. Heroes didn't feel invisible and forgotten. "He's a special boy," I managed to say. "He certainly is, and he's been working extra hard on his closing monologue. I think you're going to be very surprised." Miss Chen's smile held a secret, something that made my chest tighten with unexpected hope. The lights dimmed again, and she hurried back to her post. The second act began with more songs and skits, but I found myself distracted, wondering what she meant about Jake's closing monologue. In the program, it simply said, "Final thoughts, Jake Morrison, narrator." As the play neared its end, the other children took their places for the final song, but Jake remained center stage, alone under the spotlight. He looked out over the audience, his 8-year-old face serious and determined. "Before we finish tonight," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the auditorium, "I want to talk about heroes, real heroes." The audience settled into attentive silence. Parents leaned forward, phones ready to capture this unexpected moment. The play tonight was about community, about people helping each other. But I want to tell you about my real hero. She's here tonight, sitting in the corner because someone thought that's where she belonged. My blood turned to ice. He wouldn't. My grandma Rose lost my grandpa Tom 3 years ago, but she didn't give up. She helped my mom when we didn't have enough money for groceries. She taught me how to tie my shoes and how to make pancakes that look like Mickey Mouse. When I'm scared at night, she tells me stories about Grandpa watching over us from heaven. The auditorium was completely silent now. I could feel eyes turning toward my corner, searching. My face burned with embarrassment, but also with something else, something warm and unfamiliar. Someone gave her a ticket tonight that said, "The old lady in the corner." But she's not just an old lady. She's Rose Morrison, and she's the strongest person I know. She never asks for anything, never complains, never stops taking care of everyone else. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't care who saw them. So this whole play, every song, every scene, every word I said tonight, I dedicate it to my Grandma Rose, because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear navy blue coats and sit in corners, but they're heroes just the same. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous roar. People were standing, turning to look at me, their faces no longer filled with pity, but with something that looked like respect. Through my tears, I saw Sarah in the 3rd row, her hand pressed to her mouth, her own eyes glistening. Jake found me in the crowd and smiled, that gap-toothed, brilliant smile that had carried me through so many dark days. What would you do if your 8-year-old grandson turned your moment of deepest shame into your greatest triumph? Would you have the courage to stand up and claim the recognition you never knew you deserved? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you would do in my place. The applause seemed to go on forever, but I sat frozen in my corner seat, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. People were turning to look at me, some wiping away tears, others nodding with understanding. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a spotlight had been turned on a part of my life I'd kept carefully hidden. When the curtain finally fell and the audience began to disperse, I remained seated, unsure of how to navigate this new reality. The woman with the pearls who had checked my ticket earlier appeared at the end of my row, her perfectly composed face now flushed with embarrassment. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice tight. I wanted to apologize. I had no idea who you were when I processed your ticket. The labeling system we used was inappropriate." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had dismissed me so easily just 2 hours ago. She was probably a volunteer, probably meant no harm, probably never thought about how her words might land on someone else's heart. "It's Rose," I said quietly. "My name is Rose." She nodded quickly and hurried away, leaving me alone with the weight of what had just happened. Sarah appeared at my side, her face streaked with mascara and something that looked like shame. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the ticket. I just asked them to reserve you a seat, and they said they'd put the old lady in the corner," I finished for her. "It's all right, sweetheart. You didn't know." But even as I said the words, I wondered if that was entirely true. Had Sarah really not known? Or had she simply not cared enough to check, too busy with her own life to think about how her mother might be treated? Jake came bounding over, still in his bow tie, but with his hair mussed from the excitement backstage. He threw his arms around me with the fierce intensity that only 8-year-olds can muster. "Did you like it, Grandma? Did you hear what I said about you?" I held him tight, breathing in the scent of stage makeup and little boy sweat. "I heard every word, sweetheart, every beautiful word. Miss Chen helped me write it. She said sometimes grown-ups forget to see how special other grown-ups are, and maybe I could help them remember." Out of the mouths of babes. I looked over his head to see Miss Chen approaching, her paint-stained cardigan now accessorized with a huge smile. "Mrs. Morrison, I hope you don't mind that Jake wanted to say those things. He's been talking about you all semester, and when he saw your ticket," she trailed off, her cheeks reddening. "He saw the ticket? I left it on the counter," Sarah admitted quietly. "He asked me what it meant, and I didn't know what to say." So my grandson had carried that knowledge with him all evening, had stood on that stage knowing that someone had reduced his beloved grandmother to a dismissive label, and instead of being embarrassed by me, he had chosen to honor me. The walk to the parking lot felt different than it had 2 hours earlier. Parents nodded at me as we passed, some stopping to shake my hand or tell me how moved they were by Jake's words. A few mentioned their own elderly parents or grandparents, sharing quick stories of sacrifice and love that had gone unrecognized for too long. "You raised a special boy," one father said, gesturing toward Jake, who was skipping ahead of us, still buzzing with excitement. "He's my daughter's son," I corrected automatically. "But he learned those values somewhere," the man replied with a knowing smile. "Children don't just develop that kind of loyalty and love on their own." As we reached Sarah's car, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I've been so caught up in my own problems, in trying to keep everything together after the divorce, that I haven't been seeing you clearly." I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I understood, that being a single mother was hard enough without worrying about an aging parent's feelings. But something had shifted inside me during those moments on stage, something that made me want to be more honest than I'd been in years. "I felt invisible for a long time, Sarah. Even before tonight, even before that ticket. I know you're doing your best, but sometimes I feel like I'm just in the way." She reached for my hand, her fingers cold in the October air. "You're not in the way, Mom. You're everything. Jake and we wouldn't have made it without you. I just got so used to you always being there, always being strong, that I forgot you might need to feel appreciated too." Jake bounced over to us, oblivious to the emotional weight of our conversation. "Can we get ice cream to celebrate? Miss Chen said the whole cast is going to Friendly's." I looked at my daughter, then at my grandson, then up at the star-filled sky that Tom used to say held all our dreams and possibilities. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. "Ice cream sounds perfect," I said, and meant it. But as we drove through the quiet streets of Queens toward the bright lights of Friendly's, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Jake's words had awakened something in me, something that had been sleeping for too long. The old lady in the corner was ready to step into the light. The Friendly's restaurant buzzed with excitement as cast members and their families crowded into the red vinyl booths, still high from the evening's performance. Jake had insisted I sit next to him, and he kept patting my arm as if to make sure I was really there. The other children looked at me with new interest. I was no longer just another grandmother in the background, but the woman their friend Jake had called a hero. "Mrs. Morrison," called out Tommy Chen, a fifth grader who had played the store owner. "Jake says you make the best chocolate chip cookies in Queens. Is that true?" Before I could answer, Jake jumped in. "She makes them from scratch, and she always lets me lick the spoon, even when Mom says it's not healthy because of the raw eggs." The children giggled, and I found myself smiling more genuinely than I had in months. When had I stopped noticing how good it felt to be appreciated for the small things? The cookies, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees kissed better. Sarah sat across from us, picking at her sundae, and watching the interaction with something that looked like wonder. "I remember those cookies," she said softly. "You used to make them every Sunday when I was little. The whole house would smell like vanilla and butter." "You stopped asking for them when you turned 16, I replied, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. "Said they were too fattening, that none of your friends' mothers baked anymore." A shadow crossed Sarah's face. "I was such a brat, wasn't I? You were a teenager. It's different." But even as I said it, I realized that Sarah had never really come back to those Sunday cookies, even as an adult. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped offering, and she had stopped expecting, and we had both accepted that those small rituals of love were things of the past. Miss Chen appeared at our table, having changed out of her paint-stained cardigan into a simple sweater. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to thank you for being such an inspiration to Jake. His essay about family heroes was one of the most moving pieces I've read in 15 years of teaching." "He wrote an essay about me?" "Several, actually. Would you like to see them?" She pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos until she found what she was looking for. "Here's one from last month. The assignment was to write about someone who makes a difference in your community." I took the phone with trembling hands and read Jake's careful 8-year-old handwriting. "My Grandma Rose makes a difference by being there when nobody else can be. When Mom has to work late, Grandma makes dinner and helps with homework. When I'm sad about Dad moving away, she tells me stories about when she was little and how families can be different shapes but still full of love. She doesn't have a lot of money, but she always finds ways to make things special, like putting food coloring in pancakes to make them rainbow colors or letting me help plant flowers in coffee cans because we don't have a yard." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had no idea Jake saw me this way, that my small efforts to fill the gaps in his life had meant so much to him. "There's more," Miss Chen said gently, scrolling to another photo. "This one's from his What I Want to Be When I Grow Up assignment. When I grow up, I want to be like my Grandma Rose. She is brave even when she's scared, and she takes care of people even when nobody takes care of her. She never complains even when her back hurts from cleaning houses, and she always has time to listen to my problems even when she has her own problems. I want to be the kind of person who makes other people feel safe and loved, just like she does." I handed the phone back to Miss Chen, unable to speak. Around us, the restaurant continued its cheerful chaos, but I felt suspended in a bubble of revelation. This child saw me, really saw me, in ways I hadn't even seen myself. "Jake," I said, turning to my grandson, who was now wearing a chocolate mustache from his sundae, "why didn't you ever tell me you wrote these things about me?" He shrugged with the casual wisdom of childhood. "I tell you stuff all the time, Grandma. I tell you you're the best, and I love you and you make everything better. You just never believe me." The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. How many times had he told me I was special, and I had dismissed it as the sweet but meaningless chatter of a child? How many compliments had I deflected? How many moments of appreciation had I brushed aside because I couldn't believe I was worthy of them? "You're right," I said, reaching over to wipe the chocolate from his face with my napkin. "I haven't been very good at listening, have I?" "It's okay," he said, with the easy forgiveness of the very young. "Grown-ups are weird about compliments. Miss Chen says it's because they forget they're special." As we prepared to leave the restaurant, several parents approached me to share their own stories. Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter played a townsperson, told me about her own mother, who had raised 5 children alone during the Depression. Mr. Rodriguez mentioned his grandmother, who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and had built a life of dignity through sheer will. "It's easy to overlook the quiet heroes," Mrs. Patterson said, "the ones who don't make a lot of noise but hold everything together." Walking to the car, I felt something shifting inside me, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, I had been selling myself short for years. Jake's public declaration had been a gift, but it was also a challenge. If this 8-year-old boy could see my worth so clearly, why couldn't I? The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. As Sarah started the car, I made a decision that surprised even me. "Sarah," I said, "I want to start making Sunday cookies again. For Jake, for you, for anyone who wants them." She met my eyes in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter really looking at me, not as a burden or an obligation, but as a person with something valuable to offer. "I'd like that, Mom. I'd like that very much." As we drove through the quiet streets toward home, I realized that Jake's words had done more than honor me. They had awakened me. The old lady in the corner was ready to step into the center of her own life. The days following the school play felt different, as if someone had adjusted the lens through which I viewed my own life. Word of Jake's dedication had spread through the small community network of parents and teachers, and I found myself receiving unexpected phone calls and visits from people I barely knew. Mrs. Chen, Tommy's mother, and Miss Chen's sister-in-law stopped by on Tuesday afternoon with a plate of homemade dumplings and a request that caught me completely off guard. "Rose," she said, settling into my small kitchen with the familiarity of an old friend, "I heard about what happened at the play, and I wanted to ask you something. Our community center is starting a program for seniors, not just activities, but real skill sharing, cooking, crafts, life stories. Would you consider teaching a baking class?" I nearly dropped the teacup I was holding. "Me? Teach? Jake's been telling everyone about your cookies, and Miss Chen mentioned that you used to work in a bakery before you got married. We need someone who understands that baking is about more than just following recipes. It's about creating something that brings people together." It was true that I had worked at Goldstein's Bakery on Atlantic Avenue for 3 years before I married Tom. I had loved the early morning hours, the smell of rising dough, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and nourishing with my own hands. But that was 45 years ago. Surely my skills were too rusty, too outdated for today's world. "I don't know," I said hesitantly. "I'm not really a teacher. You taught Jake to bake, didn't you? And Sarah, when she was young?" I thought about all the afternoons Jake and I had spent in this same kitchen, his small hands helping to measure flour, his face serious with concentration as he learned to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl. I thought about Sarah at age 7, standing on a step stool beside me, learning that the secret to good cookies wasn't just the recipe, but the love you put into mixing them. "It would just be once a week," Mrs. Chen continued. "Thursday afternoons, nothing fancy, just sharing what you know with people who want to learn." That evening, I mentioned the conversation to Sarah when she came to pick up Jake after work. She had been stopping by more often since the play, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to help with small tasks around the apartment. The shift in our relationship was subtle but unmistakable. She was seeing me as a person again, not just as a fixture in her life. "Mom, that's wonderful," she said, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. "You should absolutely do it." "I don't know if I'm qualified." "Are you kidding? You've been baking for 50 years. You know things that people my age never learned because we grew up with box mixes and store-bought everything." Jake looked up from his homework at the kitchen table. "Are you going to teach other people to make rainbow pancakes, Grandma?" "Maybe," I said, the word feeling strange and hopeful in my mouth. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the offer. When had I stopped believing I had anything valuable to share? When had I started thinking of my skills and knowledge as outdated rather than experienced? Tom used to say that I could make a feast out of nothing, that I had magic in my hands when it came to turning simple ingredients into something special. The next morning, I called Mrs. Chen and accepted her offer. The first class was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I spent the week planning what to teach. I decided to start with something simple but meaningful: my grandmother's recipe for challah bread, the one that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in my family. It was a recipe that required patience and intuition, the kind of baking that couldn't be rushed or faked. When Thursday arrived, I was more nervous than I had been in years. I arrived at the community center an hour early, my arms full of ingredients and supplies. The room was bright and cheerful, with large windows that let in the afternoon sun, and a small kitchen area perfect for demonstrations. 8 people showed up for that first class, a mix of ages and backgrounds that surprised me. There was Margaret, a widow in her 70s, who wanted to learn to bake for her grandchildren. David, a young father whose wife worked evenings, and who wanted to create special treats for his daughter. Elena, a recent immigrant who hoped to learn American baking techniques, and several others, each with their own story and motivation. As I began to explain the process of making challah, the importance of the water temperature, the way the dough should feel when it was properly kneaded, the patience required for the rising process, I felt something awakening in me that I hadn't experienced in years. These people were listening to me, really listening, hanging on my words as if they mattered. The secret, I told them as we worked the dough with our hands, isn't just in the recipe. It's in paying attention to how the dough feels, to how your kitchen smells, to the rhythm of your own hands. Baking is a conversation between you and the ingredients. Margaret looked up from her work surface, flour dusting her cheeks. My mother used to say something similar about cooking. She said you had to cook with your heart, not just your hands. Exactly, I said, moving around the room to check each person's progress. The measurements are important, but the love you put into it, that's what makes the difference. As the afternoon progressed, and the room filled with the warm, yeasty smell of rising dough, I realized something profound was happening. I wasn't just teaching these people to bake, I was sharing a part of myself that I had almost forgotten existed, the part that had value, that had wisdom, that had something meaningful to contribute to the world. When we pulled the golden braided loaves from the oven, the room erupted in applause and laughter. David took a photo of his slightly lopsided but beautiful challah to send to his wife. Elena asked if I could teach her to make American-style cookies next week. Margaret hugged me and said it was the most fun she'd had in months. Walking home that evening, carrying a warm loaf of bread and feeling lighter than I had in years, I realized that Jake's words at the school play had been more than just a sweet gesture from a loving grandson. They had been a catalyst, a spark that had ignited something in me that I thought was long dead. I was no longer just the old lady in the corner. I was Rose Morrison, teacher, baker, keeper of family traditions, and creator of new memories. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. The phone was ringing when I got home. It was Mrs. Chen again, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Rose, I've had 6 more people call asking about your baking class. Word is spreading fast. Would you be willing to add a second session?" I looked at the golden challah cooling on my counter, at the flour still dusting my hands, at the smile I could feel spreading across my face. "Yes," I said without hesitation. Yes, I would. But what I didn't know was that my newfound confidence and visibility were about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. Someone from my past was about to reappear, someone who had once made me feel as small and insignificant as that ticket label had. And this time, I would have to decide whether the woman Jake had called a hero was strong enough to face her greatest challenge yet. The second week of baking classes brought 12 eager students, and by the third week, we had a waiting list. The community center moved us to a larger room to accommodate everyone who wanted to learn, from the grandmother who makes magic with flour. Mrs. Chen approached me with news. "Rose, Channel 7 wants to do a feature story about the baking program. They heard about how it started after your grandson's dedication." Television? The thought terrified and thrilled me. "They want to interview you next Friday and film one of your classes." Jake burst through the kitchen doors after soccer practice. "Grandma Rose! Mom said you might be on TV." That evening, I called the television producer. "Hello, this is Rose Morrison. I understand you'd like to talk about my baking classes." When Friday arrived, reporter Jennifer Walsh smiled at me as cameras rolled. "Mrs. Morrison, tell us how this all started." I told the story about the offensive ticket, Jake's dedication, how his words awakened something in me. "We actually reached out to the school," Jennifer said. "The volunteer who handled ticketing, Patricia Whitman, wanted to make a statement." My blood ran cold. Patricia had been Sarah's friend's mother, who had made it clear I wasn't good enough for their social circles. Patricia walked in, looking exactly as I remembered, but with shame in her eyes. "Rose, I owe you a public apology," she said to the cameras. "I created that seating chart. When I saw Jake Morrison's grandmother, I made assumptions and labeled you without thinking." She paused. "But I did know who you were. My labeling wasn't entirely accidental." The kitchen fell silent. I've spent my life judging people by their addresses and bank accounts. I was wrong then, and wrong again with that ticket. I felt something powerful rising in my chest. Not anger, grace. "Patricia, 20 years ago, you made me feel small because I cleaned houses, but those families trusted me with their most precious spaces, just like I create beauty now with baking. I gestured around the kitchen. You labeled me the old lady in the corner because you thought I didn't matter. But my grandson saw a hero. My students see a teacher. I accept your apology, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because holding on to hurt doesn't serve anyone. Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. What would you say to people who feel invisible? Jennifer asked. I looked into the camera. Your worth isn't determined by how others see you. Sometimes it takes an 8-year-old to remind us we're heroes in our own stories. Once we step out of assigned corners, there's no limit to the difference we can make. Patricia approached after filming. Is there room in your classes for one more student? Class starts Thursday at 2 p.m., I said. Bring an apron. What would you do if someone who hurt you asked for a second chance? Would you choose grace over grudges? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring stories. The segment aired Tuesday evening, and my phone didn't stop ringing. The story struck a nerve nationally. Social media clips were shared thousands of times. Sarah brought printed emails from the community center, letters from across the country. A man in Oregon starting woodworking classes, a woman in Florida taking art classes, a grandmother in Texas teaching quilting. One letter from Carol in Michigan made Sarah cry. I'm 65 and felt useless since retiring. After watching your interview, I realized I'd been waiting for permission to matter. Yesterday, I volunteered at the Literacy Center. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to step out of the corner. Requests kept coming. The senior center wanted programs. A nursing home asked about visits. Churches inquired about cooking classes. The most unexpected call came Thursday morning. Mrs. Morrison, this is Linda Castellanos from the Food Network. We saw your story and want to talk about a potential opportunity. The Food Network wanted me for Wisdom in the Kitchen, featuring home cooks with real stories and traditional techniques. Think about it. We'd love to fly you to New York for a screen test next month. When my students arrived, I shared the news. The kitchen erupted in cheers. You have to do it, Elena exclaimed. But what if I'm not good enough? I asked. David looked surprised. Rose, you're a natural. You make everything seem possible. Patricia added quietly. You handled my cruelty with grace on live television. A cooking show should be easy. That evening over dinner, I told Sarah and Jake about the opportunity. What if you succeed? Jake interrupted. What if you become famous and help lots of people? I reached for the phone and called Linda back. I'm interested in the audition. Wonderful. Prepare 3 dishes that represent your cooking philosophy. What recipes will you make? Jake asked. Great-grandmother's challah for tradition, rainbow pancakes for joy, and whatever's in the pantry soup for resourcefulness. Sarah squeezed my hand. Those are perfect. They're so you. The scared woman from the school play was gone. Someone brave enough to take risks had taken her place. The New York flight was my first in 15 years. The Food Network studios were intimidating, sleek, modern, bustling with confident young people. Linda Castellanos met me warmly. The test kitchen looked like a dream, with professional appliances and cameras positioned everywhere. Chef Isabella Santos and producer Marcus waited. We want to see you cook normally while telling your stories, Marcus explained. I started with challah, explaining my grandmother's recipe. Kneading bread is like kneading love into your family, I said, working the practiced dough. You don't measure flour exactly, Chef Santos observed. After 50 years, you learn to feel when it's right. For rainbow pancakes, I explained creating them during Jake's difficult divorce period. I wanted to show him that even when things seem broken, you can still create something beautiful. The final soup used leftover ingredients. This recipe doesn't exist, it's a philosophy. When you don't have much money, you learn to see potential in things others might throw away. Chef Santos asked the dreaded question, Are you ready for television scrutiny and pressure? I stirred the soup thoughtfully. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified, but my grandson taught me that hiding our gifts doesn't serve anyone. If I can help one person feel less alone in their kitchen, whatever criticism comes is worth it. I continued. For too many years, I let others define my worth. I'm not doing that anymore. I know who I am. A teacher, grandmother, woman with something valuable to share. Chef Santos smiled genuinely. Rose, you're perfect for this show. The tasting went beautifully. This is exactly what we're looking for, Marcus said. Authentic cooking with real stories. 3 days later, Linda called. I had gotten the show. 6 episodes to start. Are you ready to become the Food Network's newest star? Looking around my small kitchen at family photos and my apron hook, I said without hesitation, yes, I'm ready. Would you have the courage to step into the spotlight after being overlooked? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for Rose's incredible conclusion. 6 months later, Wisdom in the Kitchen with Rose Morrison had become one of Food Network's most popular shows. Success brought wonderful opportunities, but also online critics who said I was too old, too simple, not sophisticated enough. The old Rose might have crumbled, but I understood that not everyone would appreciate what I offered, and that was okay. Today's final episode featured chocolate chip cookies, the ones I'd made for Jake since he could crack eggs. Sometimes the simplest recipes carry the most love, I told the camera, measuring ingredients. My grandson taught me that love isn't always quiet. Sometimes it needs to be declared publicly. As cookies baked, I shared my announcement. I'm starting a foundation called No More Corners, providing cooking classes for seniors, single parents, and anyone pushed to society's margins. The idea grew from hundreds of viewer letters wanting to start their own classes. We all have something valuable to offer, I continued, pulling golden cookies from the oven. The question isn't whether we're good enough, it's whether we're brave enough to step out of assigned corners and claim our place in the center of our own lives. I plated cookies simply. These are for Jake, who saw a hero when others saw an old lady. For Sarah, who learned to see me clearly. For Patricia, who had courage to apologize. And for viewers who found their own voices through my story. Taking a warm bite, I closed my eyes, savoring butter, vanilla, chocolate, the taste of home and belonging. Food is never just about food. It's about connection, tradition, courage to nourish others. It's understanding we all deserve a seat at the table, not hidden in corners, but in the center where we can be seen and appreciated. My phone buzzed. Can't wait to see the episode, Grandma Rose. You're still my hero. I smiled, remembering that scared woman from the school play. The confident woman I'd become felt like who I'd always been meant to be. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the smallest acts of courage. A child's brave words, an elderly woman's decision to believe in her worth, a community's willingness to see beyond labels. My story wasn't ending. It was beginning. Somewhere in corners across the country, others were getting ready to step into their own light, to discover they too were heroes in stories deserving to be told. The end.